Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the second National Indigenous Agriculture Sharing Circle hosted by Canadian Agricultural Human Resources Council. My name is Beverly O'Neill. My traditional name is Klawampatki Hunene Tanaha. I am from the Tanaha Nation and proud to be sharing, being a part of these sharing circles with you today, as well as for the next three sessions. Before I get started, it's important as Indigenous people that we recognize and remember we are on the whose traditional lands we are on. For myself, I am on the unceded traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people here in the Vancouver Lower Mainland. A couple things before we get started and before I introduce our panel. These are webinar series, and as a webinar series, it's just the speakers / the panelists that have the audio and the video feature on. So I do encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat feature to everybody else. Let us know who's there. Plus, if you have any questions you would like to ask any of the panelists, you can use the Q&A chat. It gives you the option of asking people questions directly, or specifically naming someone like Marguerite or Jennifer or Sunny, a direct question, and they'll either answer it directly through the chat, through the question and answer feature, or I'll bring it up during the conversation itself. Let's see. These sessions are scheduled to go on Central Time from 11 to 12:15, so an hour and 15 minutes. So about 12 o'clock or in an hour, we will be going into our resource session, and then we finish the session with draw prizes for the Indigenous attendees. So for you that have not yet been in any of these sessions, you must be present to win. So another thing is these sessions are being recorded, so the panelists and the speakers, we have a recording of them. Canadian Agricultural Human Resources Council, they are editing the clips after, and then we'll be posting them on CAHRC. So if you go, I remember that Marguerite said something. I really wish I remembered all of the things she said. Well, around January, you'll see those online, so you can refer to them itself. So let's see, co-host presentation. We are going to actually do a little quick introduction of our panelists and the speaker online. First person I just want to mention, he is our technician, the guy that's been sending out all of the messages. That's Aaron Bryson. So Aaron, give everybody a wave. Aaron's an important person to you guys because for the Indigenous participants, he's the one that puts your name in the draws. So, be kind to him, and don't forget to share the invitation to others. We've got 3 more sessions, which I'll introduce to you guys at the end of the session. We also have our 2 resource people, Matthew Lefebvre, and we've got from Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada. We have another person from Agricultural Agri-Foods Canada joining us a little bit later, and that's Dominique, and he'll be giving you the resource information itself. Jesse Robson is from Farm Credit Canada. Jesse, give everybody a wave. Okay. There you go. Great. Thanks, Jesse. Our 3 panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to our Canadian Agriculture Human Resources Council to do the introduction there. Our 3 subject matter experts. First of all, there's Marguerite Parker from the Aboriginal Aquaculture Association itself. So she's going to be speaking on fisheries. We've got, so Marguerite, give everybody a wave. Great, thanks, Marguerite. Our other person is for the on the expert panelist is Sunny Gray. Sunny, if you can take yourself off video and give everybody a wave. Great. Sunny's from Yukon. Great, thanks, Sunny. And our co-host for this session is the Saskatchewan Indian. Here we go. Is the Saskatchewan Indian Equity Foundation. Jennifer Sutherland is the a speaker from that. She's an account officer. Jennifer, take yourself off video. Give everybody a wave. We'll see her in a moment. She just had some computer problems. In these sessions, yeah. Oh, you're on Terry's computer. Yes. That happened. Okay. So we're going, how did Terry get on here? So Jennifer is now Terry. So you've seen her. In these sessions, we want to make sure that we celebrate the initiatives, the organizations and the leaders in different regions across Canada and the Indigenous community that support and enable further Indigenous agriculture and agri-foods participation itself. So today's co-host is Saskatchewan Indian Equity Foundation, and you've just seen Jennifer give everybody a wave. Again, reminder, introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't yet done so, and feel free to use the Q&A. I am going to turn it over to Canadian Agriculture Human Resources Council representative Deborah Hauer. She's going to give a few words here from CAHRC.
Well, hello everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council, we're very pleased to provide a forum for people involved in Indigenous agriculture to come together as a network to share their experiences and to learn from each other. We're pleased to help make this happen. The Sharing Circle initiative is a new initiative for us, and we're hoping to continue to support the network as it grows and builds over time. So thank you very much. Jade, would you like to speak to the next slide, please?
Okay. And of course, there's Jade from Canadian Agriculture Human Resources. I apologize for missing you, Jade.
That's okay. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to take a quick moment to introduce the National Occupational Standards. So we have 4 different roles of National Occupational Standards, and what these are detailed lists of all the tasks required to be proficient in a certain role. And what we want to do is get some more involvement. So make sure that we have Indigenous practices that are part of this, make sure it has that lens. So we're hopeful that we can share these documents with you guys, and those that are interested in and have knowledge and around the commodity areas that we have done some research on would be willing to review. So I can certainly connect by email, but if you are interested, please leave a comment in the chat and we can talk more about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jade. So Jade's email is there on the screen as well.
And next, I'd like to speak a little bit about the wage.
Sorry, Deborah. I've muted you, so if you can go back on, please. Sorry, we had some back feed. So Deborah, sorry, I've muted you. If you could unmute yourself.
Jennifer, I have to use my computer.
Okay.
I think thank you. Yes, I just would like to speak for a minute or so about a new wage subsidy opportunity that CAHRC is just engaged in. The student wage subsidy program is open to all agriculture employers in all sectors. So students must be enrolled in a post-secondary program that includes a work placement requirement. And there is a subsidy for each hire by an agriculture employer. And it could be an owner-operator, it could be an agriculture organization of any sort who's hiring somebody, a student, to do some work. Positions can range from hands-on farm work to accounting and equipment maintenance, business planning, communications, anything that you can think of. And we would be very pleased to speak to anybody who's interested in wanting to hire a student and also to obtain a subsidy through CAHRC. So Erin, I was wondering if you'd be so kind as to add in the link that's on the slide into the chat so everybody can go to find out more about this program if they would like. So thank you, and over to you, Beverly.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Deborah, I have one question. It says the program runs from September 1st to the end of March.
Yes.
So can you sort of, that's for most areas that is outside of the primary growing season. So
yes, indeed. We were able to obtain confirmed funding between July and the end of March 2022. So that's what is confirmed at this time. However, and we're actively looking to match employers with students between now and the end of March. However, if people are interested in engaging in this program in the summertime, we would encourage employers to also make an application We have requested funding, it's not confirmed, but if we can show that there is interest by employers, then we are hopeful that we will have another 2 years worth of funding.
Excellent. So last question on that. You said that you can access the funding for things like marketing, and so I would suspect it's also for people working with you on planning. So you can start planning for your agricultural seasons of 2022. So at least these funds are there to help with the off-season planning.
Absolutely. And my understanding is that there has been a broad range of jobs that employers have been looking to fill. This morning, I just heard that they were looking for a cheesemaker, for somebody to help with cheese making. So there's a variety of different options.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Deborah. I just wanted to give a shout out to a couple of people from across Canada that's joining us today. So like I said, do look in the chat feature because you can see other people from there. So shout out to Roxanne Notley. Thank you for joining us from the East Coast, and Port Hope Simpson. She's with the Food Security Coordinator with Nunavut Community Council. Roxanne, in a couple sessions, I think the last session we have Makavik, which I hope you'll join us because they're going to be talking about their food security program in Nunavut itself. So Leah, welcome from Treaty 1 in Territory East Street in Paul, Manitoba. We've got Jay Boussier from the University of Manitoba, Chris Stein, Kingston University and Correctional Services. We've got Mitchell Riley listening from Southern Ontario. So there's just a few people. I'll probably introduce a few of you guys later on in the session, but thank you guys for joining us. So this is now where we get on to, we'll ask Jennifer Sutherland if she would like to share some comments from the Saskatchewan Indian Equity Foundations. Jennifer, let us know, what does Saskatchewan Indian Equity Foundation do, and any success stories you'd like to share?
Well, SEAF is a developmental lender. We provide assistance for commercial agricultural lending for our clients, for individual First Nations as well as individuals. To start, what I do is agricultural lending. So I support people who want to start their farms or expand their farming operations. We have clients that have operations between 10 head of cows, 200 cows. So it just depends on what they want to do. And we're supportive of everything that they want. And in-house, we also have a grant program that provides non-repayable grant to qualified entrepreneurs to either start up or expand their own businesses. And it's a great full encompassing program we have here with lending and the grant program combined.
So, Jennifer, can you give a couple examples of some of the initiatives you've supported?
Yes, like from where I am in agricultural lending, I've had people start off operations with like 20 head of cattle to start off from scratch, and I see them grow from 20 head of cattle to 100 head of cattle, so they can actually quit their jobs and work full time on their operations. And it's satisfying to see people who actually can realize their dreams and what they actually want to do with their lives.
Excellent. Great, thanks, Jennifer. This is where I'm going to go into, and Jennifer, stay on video. Ask Sunny and Marguerite if you can join us by putting yourself on video so we can see your face. This is where we're going to get into some conversation. We have a couple of comments though in the chat. So I think they're asking Jennifer for your email so they can link into the SEAF program and connect with you. So if you can add that to chat, that would be great. And for other people, feel free to use the Q&A feature to add in questions if you have a question specifically to the panelists or anything general, and they'll either answer them directly through the Q&A feature or we'll ask them to all of the panelists as an audio feature itself. So I think our first question then is going to go to Sunny. So if you can take yourself off mute. You know, Sunny, when we first spoke earlier this year in the spring, you were working with a few First Nations in Yukon. And currently you're speaking today about the Nacho First Nation farm. What agricultural activities and ventures are First Nations involved with in the North?
Oh, we're we're actually just starting to see a little bit of a shift right now, where a lot of those First Nations are starting to enter into the agriculture sector. I think currently their focus is mostly on self-sustainability. So they're starting farms to produce vegetables, to produce fruit, to produce meat, to subsidize, their current access to food. Unfortunately, due to climate change and other environmental impacts, we're seeing a reduction in moose populations here in the north. We're seeing a reduction in salmon populations in the north. And I think a lot of the First Nations here are recognizing that in order to adapt to the future, farming is potentially a nice segue into that adaptation, right? What's nice is that these First Nations aren't necessarily taking a traditional colonial approach to farming. They're looking at it mostly, from my experience, the First Nations that I've been working with a permaculture approach or a regenerative farming approach. So taking some of their ethics and values that they apply from being on the land and applying that in a traditional farm setting.
I think that's, can you expand on, you said regenerative farming. Anything specific you can share on that?
Well, I think it boils down to practices, right? How we farm I mean, I grew up farming in Quebec as a child, as a teenager, and how we farmed in Quebec was not necessarily the same as how we're farming here with the First Nations. And that, like I said, a lot of that is because of values. So, you won't see the First Nations that I'm working with anyways, you won't see them using pesticides or herbicides or fungicides. Even chemical fertilizer isn't something that they're necessarily interested in using. So they're more interested in using the livestock to help build the soil and to fertilize the soil, which these practices aren't, they're not foreign practices. In fact, they were traditional practices for farmers, for a long time, for centuries, until, we kind of adopted different approaches via science. So this is something that they traditionally they're interested in. The Natchinayak Dun Farm, for example, is in close proximity to Partridge Creek and the Stewart River. Both of these are rivers and bodies of water that are important to the First Nations. It's in their traditional territory. And so there are concerns about, well, how is our farming in this area going to impact these bodies of water in this area? So important.
So really, it's returning to some. Okay, here's the first pun: traditional roots. I think for future sessions, we're going to have to take a bet on how long it takes Beverly to add in a pun into the conversation. So we were 20 minutes into this one today. But returning to the traditional values and traditional roots that have always been sustaining. I want to I do want to come back to some of the things that you've said, but I want to just have Marguerite Parker from Aboriginal Aquaculture introduce herself. And some of you might be thinking, we're not on the coast, so why are we even talking about aquaculture? And this is an earlier conversation Marguerite and I had, was how do we get agriculture and aquaculture together? And she said, it's just not for coast. You can do aquaculture inland itself. So tell us, Marguerite, how would that look?
Well, first of all, good morning. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm coming to you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations here in Vancouver, where happily the sun is shining today as opposed to rain. Yes, you're right, Beverly. Aquaculture does occur in all 10 provinces and in the Yukon. It can be freshwater, it can be inland, it can be on land, and of course, currently, it is mostly practiced on the coast right now, but there is opportunity all across Canada for aquaculture.
Yeah, last week we had Derek Derek in Dawson City speak about how the First Nations there that he works in their greenhouse, they're looking at adding an aquaculture feature to their greenhouse, and that's in Dawson City, Yukon.
But I think he was talking of hatcheries. Hatcheries is a form of aquaculture, where anytime that you are growing something that wouldn't normally grow naturally, it's aquaculture when it's related to the marine.
So sweet. Any examples that you can think of that for an inland hatchery or an aquaculture that First Nations doing?
Rainbow trout is very popular, and that is actually practiced all across Canada. But it is something that First Nations are engaged with, particularly in Ontario on the lakes, in Manitoula Island. There's a very active trout operation there. That's been going for a number of years, very profitable, First Nation community owned. Small businesses benefit from it that provide services to it.
Yeah, so we've got examples of some inland fisheries operations already itself. As Jennifer, have you, today's session, we're talking about livestock and aquaculture / fisheries. Any example you can give, like how would a First Nation, is it something that you would look at supporting as well, an aquaculture feature?
Not the question, no. What I find with my clients specifically, aquaculture in this area isn't very lucrative for financial wise. Like I've had a few operators ask for financing for wild rights operations, but a lot of times they're not as successful year to year as something like cattle or grain is.
Yeah. So you've had some people start off, like you mentioned, with a smaller head of cattle and expand up. At what point would you suggest that they consider expanding their herd? When does it become feasible?
Well, to really have a self-sustaining operation, operators typically have to have at least 150 head of cattle. Otherwise, they can't make really a living off of it. Anything less, it's difficult to make like a personal living aside from a lot of expenses that come with having cattle, such as feed, vet expenses, stuff like fencing, that sort of thing. But I have had some clients who applied for a grant program, and they've gone from like 20 head of cattle to 200 head of cattle, and that itself is self-sustaining for income. So they've been very successful with that as well.
So the bigger head is about 100, 150, because there's all these other operating costs that you must consider in it.
Yes, it's a lot of overhead, yeah.
Sonny, you and I, when we first spoke in the spring, we talked about what might be sustained. You talked about some of the interests of the First Nations in Yukon, and you said that one reason they are focusing a lot more on aquaculture farming their own activities in agriculture is for food security itself. Can you mention a couple of the things that we talked about in the spring, expand on them, about some of the initiatives that the First Nations are getting into there, and I'm particularly interested in hearing about chickens.
Yeah,
I
sure.
have a big thing on chickens now since Sonny and I first spoke.
So yes, I mean, I guess we're in a unique position in the Yukon because of our because of the distance from southern markets. So there is a lot of focus on food security, but also food sovereignty. The Yukon's in a unique position as well. The First Nations here are mainly settled. They've got their own land. They have their own form of government. They're self-governing, and they have access to their own capital and dev corps. So they're in a unique position, I think, to be able to actually work towards being completely self-sustainable, or working towards it. As I said, it's difficult because There are a lot of inputs from a farming perspective, so, feed and that sort of stuff, you need access to a lot of land to be able to be truly self-sustainable. But they're working towards it anyways. Some of what
Sonny,
that might look like.
Yeah, when you don't have a lot of land, what do you do?
Well, and yeah, that's what it boils down to, right? Is there are two different ways of doing it. If you're doing it for yourself, and you're trying to be self-sustainable as a one person, that looks like a much smaller operation, and there's typically those people have to work another job just to be able to provide the cash flow to live that lifestyle. Versus if you have a larger commercial scale farm, you might be in a more unique position to be able to create more of a self-sustainable loop, especially if you partner with other First Nations or other farmers in the area that can help complement some of the stuff that you might be missing. The territory itself, I think, is starting to see that talk track of self-sustainability is something that's fairly current here in the Yukon. We're seeing that quite a bit. Especially with the COVID and well, now Vancouver's got no access or exit right now, so these are the world is changing fast, and I think a lot of the First Nations, the elders here in the Yukon, they saw this coming a long time ago. They've had food mandates from dating back from the late 60s, early 70s. They recognized that the times were going to change and that food was going to become scarce, and it was going to be difficult, from a logistic perspective, to get your hands on food. So it's definitely come full circle when you start to see farms here in the Yukon that are being started and operated by First Nations. So it's exciting times.
Yeah. So we've been talking a little bit about. There's been introductions in this conversation on small scale production for local and self-sustainability, as well as expansion into large production for accessing or selling into the general population itself. But I wanted to return though to chickens. Sonny, chickens, because that was something you said, look, it's for those of you that don't have a lot of land, you mentioned chickens.
Oh yeah,
Sonny,
for
chickens.
sure. For sure. So right now the livestock at the Anachinaik farm is comprised of rabbits, meat rabbits, chickens, and some pigs. So right now they're on their second and third generation of piglets and pigs and chickens and meat rabbits. So they've been going at it long enough now to create their own breeding stock. There's going to be a shift, I think, as time progresses, to look towards more dual purpose birds. Right now, the birds that are being used are mainly laying hens. So they have great egg production, but we hatch all our own birds at that farm. And it would be ideal if when we were hatching, the males, the roosters, as they grow out, that we could use those for meat. The laying stock isn't ideal for meat production. Some countries they'll eat them, like India or Jamaica. They basically put them in a crock pot for a day or two, and they eat them that way. But it's not, from a traditional standpoint, most people aren't used to eating that type of birds. So moving towards dual purpose birds, same idea with cattle. If the First Nations was to invest into cattle, I think they would probably move towards a dual purpose cow, where it can milk, but it can also be used for meat. And that boils down to your breeding. So you don't want to have any waste. You want to be able to use, when you breed, you want to be able to use all your stock. So if you've got males, that you can dispose of them and be able to eat them. That's the goal.
Picking the right chicken or the right cattle is obviously very important, based on what you want to use it for, plus your surrounding environment itself.
Yes.
So Margaret, yeah, you mentioned rainbow trout. So how might a First Nation get into something like aquaculture, fisheries in the inland? What are the steps needed for that? Do you need a lot of what are the conditions? What are the resources needed? Sorry.
Right. One of the very important things to look at before you venture down the road of growing fish inland is you really need to do an assessment of what you have. What are your biophysical capabilities as well, which means it can be grown there, but also means what other infrastructure is available. I think last week, Trevor spoke of farms, consultants had said you could grow something, but didn't look to see if there was access to water. The same goes for aquaculture inland operations. You need to have reliable access to water, and you need to have reliable access to power, and you need to have land that's available to you. And those that have been successful generally own the land, so that decreases your overall cost, because growing fish inland is a very expensive prospect and highly technical in nature. So you need to make sure you've really researched it and determined that it would be feasible for you to do.
Great, thanks, Marguerite. I just another question to you, and then we're going to go to. I've got a question for Jennifer. Question to you though is, with greenhousing, can you add aquaculture onto a greenhouse? Well, there are more First Nations getting into greenhousing.
Right. I've not looked into the specifics about adding it to a greenhouse, but there is an aquaculture process called aquaponics. And that's where you combined aquatic animal production with hydroponics, so the cultivation of plants and water. So you have the plants growing on the top and the fish growing on the bottom, and the fish provides the fertilizer to help grow the plants. So that's called aquaponics.
I understand tilapia is a common fish they put in aquaponics.
Yes, they do, because it likes warmer water and grows faster. And yes, it's well suited for aquaponics.
Great. Thanks, Marguerite. Terry, we've been talking a bit about cattle production. With CEF, what other agricultural initiatives have you guys lent into or supported?
I think it's just because of the area we're in. Majority of clients who come to CEF approach us for cattle. It's been a couple for grain, but the majority has actually been just for cattle.
In your opinion, where do you see opportunities for First Nations in cattle farming or any other kind of animal farming?
Well, for cattle farming, what it really comes down to is land availability. A few clients of mine have bought their own land, but a majority of my clients, they get land on the reserve. Mm-hmm. So land availability plays a big part in how big they can grow as an operation.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm going to refer to a couple of questions we have here online. For all of you guys, do refer to the chat, because Terry, which I think they mean you, Jennifer, if you could add your email to the chat feature. Some people are seeking it. First question though is, are there any Indigenous farms doing mentoring to other Indigenous farmers in rural or northern and remote areas? Any of the panelists with ideas or suggestions on that? And also, if any of our listeners know of any, if you can add that to the chat feature, that would be terrific. Funny, you're nodding. I think when someone nods,
I'm just thinking. So currently, the journey is fairly fresh here in the Yukon, I think. So obviously, full disclosure, I'm the CEO of North Star Agriculture. I'm not Indigenous or First Nation. I'm hired basically as a contractor and a mentor to provide my services and my expertise to the First Nations that do hire us. So so right now, that seems to be how they're learning is they're hiring individuals like myself that have the expertise and the experience. We do a lot of mentoring. And it's because the end goal here is to phase ourselves out of the projects and have the First Nation take it on themselves. And luckily, I mean, like I said, our approaches are very different. There's a lot more culture involved and tradition. Mm-hmm. A lot of the elders come into the farm and take part there at the farm. A lot of them have experience. It's funny. I've had them say like, "Well, we're not farmers," but But they are farmers. They're just they're
Yeah.
different farming, right? They were farming the land for a long, long time.
Yeah.
You know, this is apparent all the way down the coast of BC with, especially from a fishery standpoint, even the food forests that we're seeing that are being discovered now, where they were farming, they were taking roots from plants that they enjoyed and moving them closer to where they lived. They were just basically recreating the area nearby and making it easier to access food. The same can be applied from a traditional standpoint. So we're having elders come in, and once I connect the dots for them and create those links, they're realizing and recognizing that they have been farmers all along. And now they're just shifting gears and moving into, a more traditional avenue.
Right, and like you mentioned, when you first spoke, you said, look, we're talking about First Nations traditional values that we're merging with modern ways or common ways today in farming itself. So, so we've always been workers of the lands and nurturers and harvesters, but it's bringing that modern knowledge together with traditional practices and processes. Other Marguerite or Chair or Jennifer, any examples from you? Can you think of any examples of people that are doing any mentoring with other Indigenous farmers?
I can't think of a specific example other than a lot of particularly the shellfish growers here in British Columbia. They do mentor. The First Nation operations do mentor the community members, because one of the challenges, I think, not just to aquaculture, but to all agriculture sectors, is the lack of labor and capacity. And so there's mentoring goes on to try to engage and encourage the youth to come and learn the systems, learn the process, and to farm the operations that the First Nations own. Mm-hmm. So it's not, it is just encouraging the youth to engage in the operation, to learn of it.
Yeah, reconnecting youth with the land in some
Yes.
way. We're going to go to Jennifer, and then I see Jesse has his hand up.
From what I've seen from my clientele, there aren't any specific mentors. A lot of my clients come from farming families or have other relatives who have done farming, and they typically get the mentoring within the family structure.
Thanks, Jennifer. Jesse, and then I'm going to refer to a couple of the chat features here, chat comments.
Just on that mentor note, I know that we have seen models where a First Nation will, have a farm on their land using their residents for staff, but they bring in an external, semi-retired non-Indigenous farmer to kind of manage things and begin a succession plan. So they would set a goal within 5 years, that farm manager will have a replacement that he's kind of training and bringing up. And then after a certain amount of time, that semi-retired farmer can leave the business and the First Nation takes over running it on their own. And so that is a model where it's a formalized mentorship for sure.
Yeah, so the succession planning, if you're not, one way of bringing in some expertise into your community is through someone like Sunny Gray. And Sunny, you're working for a couple First Nations in the north, and make sure you have succession planning in there, because you're right, Jennifer. A lot of our First Nations farming has come down from family, from parent to child, parent to child, parent to child, and so it's passed on from generation to generation. But we do have, First Nations communities like the one Sunny's working with in the north that are bringing in outside expertise and then melding your knowledge with their traditional practices itself. I wanted to mention that there was a couple of comments here in the chat feature of some people. So Erin Durrell, she's actually she has her own farm around Williams Lake. She does mentoring, and it's in central British Columbia, and mostly on cattle ranching and forage. So Erin's an Indigenous woman from the Secwepemc First Nation. I'm really glad you've been able to join us, Erin. Really great to see you. Sunny, if you can make sure you add your information onto the chat feature here. I also wanted to mention that there is also in a couple sessions, and I'll bring it up further at the end of this session. We have Jacob Beaton, who's going to be speaking about what they're doing here in British Columbia with his farm, doing mentoring and bringing youth in. So I think you're going to be pretty interested in hearing that. So looking at many different ways of doing it. So you don't live in a farming family or in a farming community. There are other First Nations that are showing how they're bringing together that knowledge. Sunny, I wanted to ask you, the First Nations you're working for, once you have your animals or your fish, you've got to do other things to them to get them to the table. So we're talking here about your your packaging and processing plants. Tell us, what did the First Nations do there?
Sure. So this particular First Nation that we're working with, the Natchinayak Dun First Nation, the property that they purchased was, a gem. It already had some significant infrastructure. It had a pre-existing barn, it had a machine shop, it had a pre-existing greenhouse, 30 to 40 years of agriculture usage. So the soil had been built up, and luckily it had a processing plant. So one of the territory's very first slaughterhouses, abattoirs, of white meat and red meat combined slaughterhouse, was located at this farm. So unfortunately, most of this stuff was left to kind of languish over the years, and it wasn't being used. So we're kind of renovating and bringing it back online, resurrecting the farm, if you will. But this has a massive opportunity for the First Nation, because they're able to process their animals, on site, both the traditional farm animals, as well as there's you have to be careful, but there's the wild meat component that can be processed at this site as well. Typically you have to wash all your machinery down. There's lots of different rules and regulations around that thing, but it can be done. So yeah, great opportunity, and a great way, I think, to re-engage some of the youth and pass down some traditional knowledge, because it's one thing to hunt and quarter something up, bring it into town, and then bring it into a butcher. It's another thing to quarter that animal up and process it from start to finish yourself. And it's even more personal, I think, when you've raised that animal from hatching or birth all the way through the process. It's very rewarding, and I think a lot of people are excited about the process. So we're in the process right now of just bringing this infrastructure back online, and not only will it be an asset to the First Nation, but it will impact the farmers in that area. They won't have to drive. It's 5 to 6 hour drive to Whitehorse, is the other processing station, right? The other processing plant. So now all of a sudden, farmers won't have to drive their livestock that distance. They'll be able to bring them in about an hour. I think we're an hour from 3 major communities. So that'll change things too. That'll a lot of farmers I've talked to have said that they'll increase their livestock capacity at this point, because now they know that they can process them, 1, year round, and 2, in close proximity to their farm. So there's an economic asset there as well.
So once you're getting into livestock farming or into fisheries, you have to look at how are you going to bring that animal into the marketplace or onto your table. So we've got to look at processing itself. One of the things you mentioned early when we were talking, Sunny, was the mobile processing. So we're looking at, you had mentioned that British Columbia now has that ability or restored the ability.
I've noticed that there was a shift in legislation. I'm not from Alberta or BC, so I can't speak to it, but I've been watching it closely, and I think due to some of the incidences surrounding COVID in packing plants, right? We had major packing plants shut down for, I think, up to 2 weeks at a time, and that disrupted, our national food chain in a really big way, which is which highlights, you know, the overall fragility of our food chain and our supply chain. Yeah, it's obvious, and we're hearing it more even on a federal level, that regional based infrastructure is really the way to go.
Yeah.
You know, we shouldn't be putting all of our eggs in the same basket, if you will. We really should be focusing on ensuring that every piece of you know, our separate regions have some form of infrastructure to ensure that, you know, food isn't just being grown, it's being processed and provided directly to the consumer.
Yeah, you know, thanks, Sunny, because, you know, Marguerite, too, you were talking about you need to make sure your infrastructure is there to be able to get into aquaponics, and Sunny was saying that, and Jennifer, you were saying, look, we've got to make sure we've got sufficient quantity to make things feasible itself. We've got a couple other questions here I want to return to, and that was, anyone know of any examples of farming meat ducks or ducks in general?
I had a chat with an individual out of BC at one point in time, and he was of European descent and had moved to BC, and he had a fairly large scale outfit that was doing ducks.
I haven't heard any, but I would suggest, you know, connecting with leaders in the different regions. Actually, Roy Chalafor here mentioned, he goes, he has I farm ducks at this point. We have 2 acres on our personal property, but it's for personal use at this stage. So, I mean, that's definitely a start. Thank you for sharing, Roy. Let's see, question here from Roxanne Notley. We'd love to learn more about permaculture examples that Sunny was referring to. And any, well, we start with Sunny, and if anyone else, Jennifer or Margaret, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just in the process right now of completing my permaculture design certification. So I've spent the past year online working through Jeff Lawton to get that permaculture certification. Permaculture examples at the NND farm, a lot of it has to do with stacking of functions and ensuring that if there's any waste, that we capture that waste. One of the big ones is water. Even though we have a well,
Yeah.
we had a whole bunch of infrastructure on the farm that didn't have any eaves troughs or anything like that. We installed eaves troughs, and we captured that water in these massive these massive water tanks that are all on the bank. Below the bank, there's a large garden, probably about an acre's worth of garden there. And so now we use that wastewater from the rain and the well. The well actually is artesian, so it's constantly providing water. And at the time, it was just a waste. It's laying on the ground, and it's just got this little, you know, stream that's wandering out there. So capturing all that water, putting it into all these tanks, and then creating a gravity-fed irrigation system was one way of taking, you know, something that was a waste and ensuring that it was kept on site. We also have a commercial wood chipper on site, and so when we do all our fire smarting, we chip all of those, all that wood, and we use those wood chips which mixed with shavings and use it as bedding underneath the straw, capture urine and that sort of stuff. And then it goes right back out into the compost. We do make a lot of compost there, so between the manure and the wood chips, leaves and weeds and stuff like that. Lots of examples of permaculture on a farm, and a lot of it has to do with stacked functions and ensuring that, you know, circular, lack of waste, that sort of stuff.
Great, thanks, Sunny. I remember that in our last session, we had Leon Hunter from Métis Crossing was talking about the permaculture they're doing at Métis Crossing, and that's just north of Edmonton. So if anyone was looking for more on that, he's doing that there. There's also Paulette Flamond, who wasn't a part. She's not a part of our panel, but she's out of Fort St. John in British Columbia, and she's added permaculture to her farming as well. So she mentioned there's more and more people getting into it. So it sounds like it's a closed system type of farming, which is kind of what we're talking about too, Marguerite, with aquaponics, isn't it? And fish farming. I see Sunny nodding, so he's got some thoughts going on there too.
Well, it's permaculture is being adopted, and I think it's because it's the closest fit for the First Nations and Indigenous communities that I've been working with, like in terms of values, in terms of ethics, in terms of process. It's really something that speaks to them in the sense that it's like, oh, okay, this is something that shares these values and ethics. And I think that's probably why we're starting to see it adopted on a regular basis across the country, which is great. I'm glad to see that happen.
I see Margaret and Jennifer nodding. Margaret, anything you'd like to add? I think really talking about closed system or environmental values or traditional working closer with the land. I see you nodding. I think you've got something thinking there.
Yeah, well, just to get back to with aquaculture in particular, I think for a lot of coastal First Nations, it's in our backyard, and practicing aquaculture is a connection back to our territories, right? It's co-managing it and getting food from that.
So, yeah, it's so working with nature on that. Jennifer, your thoughts on any examples you can think of that's more working closer to nature, practicing and applying Indigenous values and principles?
Well, I have quite a few clients who have implemented like a grazing strategy where they ensure that the land isn't overgrazed, to ensure that the pastures have good quality feed in many years to come. And they ensure that there's enough time for the pastures to regrow. And I've been out to visit quite a few of them, and the pastures are actually in really good condition. So it's really impressive what they have done, from grazing cattle to having like lush land.
One of the things we heard in the first session, which I think you're underscoring in this one as well, is the people you work with, you need to know what your current environment is capable of, and having those close knit, that local knowledge itself. We've got a couple comments here, and it's that people would love to hear do we have any East Coast examples on aquaponics, and anyone know about what the progress is in Ontario, and anyone know what the progress in shrimp farming in Ontario and Canada? Anything like that? Any awareness of aquaponics and shrimp farming?
I'm not aware of any particular aquaponics happening on Ontario, but I do have to say that there has been a growing interest by First Nations to get involved in aquaculture processes. So it's really hard to keep track of what everyone is doing. Where I think back when we started, it was quite easy to know who was. Now there's going on. It's really exciting to see. So I'm sorry, I don't know any specifics about aquaponics in Ontario, but I did see the question about shrimp. And again, I'm not familiar with the shrimp operations in Ontario, but I know that the one shrimp operation here in British Columbia has recently had to shut down. And I know I've talked to the technician there, and they're in the process of working with some folks who are from Israel, who have been having some success in Israel with growing shrimp on land. And they hope to sort of incorporate those processes, because again, that is a very highly technical kind of process. And so they had some challenges, but they are trying to work on addressing those. But there's no First Nation in British Columbia currently working to grow shrimp.
If I could jump in real quick, I love the fact that I'm paired with aquaculture, because I'm a huge fan of aquaculture, and the fact that it does, inland aquaculture does fit really well with traditional farming. I have a good friend of mine who's doing an aqua cannabis out of New Brunswick, Miramichi, on a commercial scale. So that's Tanner Stewart of Stewart Farms. He's doing a great job down there with tilapia. He sells the tilapia, I believe, to the Boston seafood market, and he's doing a cannabis product with those fish. In terms of shrimp, I visited a really interesting vertical shrimp farm in, I think it was in Calgary, Alberta. The biggest problem that they were faced with was that there didn't seem to be anybody in Canada providing raising the shrimp stock. And so they had to import their shrimp stock from the United States. And I guess there was a disease in the United States in the shrimp that is acceptable to the United States, but not acceptable to Canada. And so whenever that disease ends up getting transferred into their system, when they buy new stock, they end up having to, wipe the slate clean and starting all over again. But it was a very, very cool setup, vertical. starting the baby shrimp at the very top, and then as they were growing, they were harvesting them out at the bottom. It was such a cool setup.
Really, it really sounds sweet. In a couple sessions, we've actually got a full panel from Atlantic Canada, so they might have some more insight in what's going on there in the aquaponics and fish management systems itself, and any large scale production. I want to ask, Sunny, we had a question through the chat. They wanted to know more about how do you get into chicken farming itself.
So I guess it's dependent on the scale. If you want to get into large scale chicken farming, chickens in Canada are, if you're doing meat birds and if you're doing egg production, you're going to require quota, and you're going to require access to the quota system. The Yukon doesn't have a quota system, which is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. So right now we're kind of in limbo, I guess, is the way it looks. But if you're anywhere else in Canada and you plan on raising chickens on a large scale, then the first thing I would advise you to do is to look into supply management and see how easy or difficult it'll be to acquire quota. Sometimes you can purchase quota off of a farmer who's, retiring, aging farmer who's getting out of the game. But every single province has a different regulation, I guess, associated with quota. So I think Quebec, you're only allowed to have up to 100 birds. If you have any in a private farm setting, if you have any more than 100 birds, then they'll come in, they'll send somebody over, and they'll actually get rid of any birds in excess of 100. Versus Alberta, I think, is like 400 birds. So there are some rules and some legislation and regulation associated with doing larger scale chicken farming, whether you're doing meat production or egg production. So it's worthwhile looking into the logistics of that before getting your fingers slapped.
Yeah, there was a comment here that in BC it might be 100 as well.
Birds.
So if you're looking at that, then that's local market stuff, I would guess. And that was sort of, we've talked a little bit about local market, self-use, food security, as well as getting into larger scale, whether it's with cattle or fish. And that there was a couple comments on the shrimp, and it did link to your comment, Sunny, is that your friend was unable to continue with or had difficulties with shrimp farming because of disease. And that's what someone had commented, that there is that problem with disease, and because of that, the industry has been shut down. So who knows, maybe there's an emerging opportunity to restore that, now that we've got greater concerns over food security itself. I want to ask panelists, if you this is your last question, but what advice do you have to First Nations and Indigenous people on how we can strengthen our role and our participation in a livestock or fisheries or aquaculture industries itself? Got Sun here in Vancouver. Okay. Why don't we start with Jennifer, and then we'll go to Marguerite and finish with Sunny.
Any advice I would give to any potential producer is to just do some research on how much effort and financing is required to start a farming operation, because a lot of times people think they don't need a whole lot of capital to start, and then they're shocked when they actually do all the pricing and they get quotes and they realize how much equipment and infrastructure they need before they even purchase animals. So with that said, like, they can always approach CEF for a loan. They can approach CEF for a grant. They have other options available as well for financing options. But the gist of it is, it's difficult when I see all the numbers on upfront on paper, but also just give it a try. If it's something you actually want to do, just go ahead and find some resources, and I can help people out with that as well. And yeah, just give it a shot. If you want to start small, discover you don't like it, you can always just sell out, or it can just grow till it's big and it's self-sustaining.
Yeah, I like that. Terry got, Jennifer got the last pun in for, on this conversation. So each one of you successfully added a pun. The thing is that, look, connect with your Aboriginal Capital Corporation, your Indigenous Financial Corporation, and you guys often have knowledge in-house, or you can help connect if you're in an area where the local Aboriginal Capital Corporation doesn't have that in-house knowledge, but see if you guys do. So you can guide them right from the beginning on how to start a farm and what to do, and really help them become aware of what the capital costs are to get into a business, into this industry. Great. Marguerite, your suggestion.
First of all, good advice, Jennifer. I agree. I think sometimes when First Nations are looking to aquaculture, that they really need to consider what their goals and what their objectives are. Some of the models that I've seen that have been successful is when the First Nation steps aside and allows one of their members to take on an operation, and they've got skin in the game, they are committed to it. You know, when they're focused on it, they've got a champion for that operation. So it doesn't always mean that the First Nation has to own and operate the business. They can just clear the way for their members to be able to do that. Another one of my pet things is that if you are going to engage in aquaculture, I think it's really important to engage the community, and particularly to engage the youth. You really need to start young, to have the youth in your community look at what's possible, and look at the kinds of contribution or work that they'd like to do around that operation, and start early, exploring the STEM, getting the right education and work experiences through the summer, that kind of thing. So those would be things that I would recommend.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Marguerite. Sunny, your suggestions, please.
Yeah, solid advice all the way up. That's why I like being last. I think to build on that stuff, I would say, mentorship is important. Linking in with someone who has the knowledge to be able to help build your capacity from a knowledge standpoint. There's lots of different ways of doing that. Sometimes if you're doing it on a small scale, it's just you and you're giving it a go. When you attend farmers markets, or you become part of an agriculture association, and you get to know people, it doesn't take long. Farmers typically are a friendly bunch, and they're willing to help other farmers, especially because they recognize that when you're starting from scratch, or you're starting and you're fairly green, they remember being potentially in that position, and they're more than willing to help out. If you're an actual nation and you're looking at it, you've done some community engagement, and everyone's more or less on the same page, and you're looking at and doing something on a large scale, then definitely include professionals. If you feel like your experience isn't necessarily up there, it's going to save you a lot of money, I think, in the long run, because trial and error with farming is an expensive business. You want to make sure that you have professionals at the table to help guide you and mentor you and train you, so that when the time comes that you do have the capacity to take over your operation, you're very educated in the day-to-day operation of that farm. That would, I guess, be my 2 cents.
So building knowledge, getting skills there, really understanding what you're getting into here, what the basic costs are. You might be starting off small, knowing your local market, knowing the resources. Succession planning, train, engage youth. Some very, very key solid advice for our audience itself. So for all 3 of you guys, please add your contact information into the chat. There's a lot of people looking for ideas here on where to get started. Speaking about where to get started, first of all, I'd like to thank Jennifer, Marguerite, and Sunny for your ideas and experience in sharing with the audience. This is where we now go into the session on, we've got a couple of resources that we've asked to always be a part of our sessions. So by the end of this time, that you'll know where you may also reconnect or connect to for some additional resources or support services itself. So we will go into, let me just bring this up. programs and support. We've got Jesse Robson here with Farm Credit Canada, and we've got Dominique Kelly from Agriculture Agri-Foods. You've already met Matt Lefebvre. So I'm going to ask actually Dominique Kelly from Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada, if you can introduce yourself, and I'll ask Jennifer if you can go on off video so that we can now focus on Dominique, and as well if Jesse, if you can go on video, that would be great. So Dominique, we're going to turn it over to you. You're from Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada. You're going to talk a little bit about a couple of the programs that you have available.
Yeah, thank you, Beverly. As Beverly mentioned, I'm Dominic Kelly. I work for Agriculture Agri-Food Canada, and I work for the Indigenous Pathfinder team for our department. What we have at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is we have about 6 programs that are focused towards Indigenous peoples. And then, of course, all the other programs that my department has is available to everybody, including Indigenous peoples. So the first one I'd like to talk about is the Pathfinder service, which is something that I work on. We were established in 2018, and what we do is we offer a service to Indigenous peoples and communities who want to learn about the programs and services that we have available to them in the department. We listen to everybody's project ideas, make some suggestions, and then we try to connect them to programs within our department. And the other thing that we do is we also look outside of our department to the provinces and to private industry, and say like FCC as well. Like, we try to make those connections when we see that there's a connection that's possible or that's available. Another program that we do have is the Indigenous Agriculture Food Systems Initiative. This program is about economic development with Indigenous communities. So it was a 5-year program from 2018 to 23, and we have $8.5 million to help support projects in agriculture and agri-food that will have long-term economic development potentials for the communities. And right now for that program, I just want to say that there's limited funding available to the end. So the application window is actually closed right now, but it should be, or may be, reopening in the future if more money is available. Another program that we have is the Agri-Diversity program, which is also a 5-year program, and it's worth $5 million. What this program does, or what it's focusing on developing sort of national or industry support for Indigenous communities and Indigenous leaders in the agriculture sector. So some of the programs that we've supported with Agri-Diversity would be around Indigenous policy work, with how to increase participation in agriculture, reduction of barriers. And we also support other initiatives such as, I think it's Agribition in Saskatchewan, where they have an Indigenous Day, and we fund that. We've been funding that for the last 3 years. So it's about developing Indigenous networks.
Okay.
And the final program that we have, that's be on this slide, is the Local Food Infrastructure Fund. And this program is focused very much so on developing food systems within Indigenous communities. So if you have a community food center or a place where maybe that people process meat or other types of food, and you need a fridge or a roof or even a greenhouse, this is what the local food infrastructure has been developed for. Currently, it is closed for applications at this time, but it should be reopening within the next, probably 5 to 6 months. Not quite sure on that. They're working on that as we speak. And
Excellent. Thank you, Dominique. So for Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada people, if you can put your contact in the email or a link where they can find more information on these programs, that would be terrific. So actually in the chat feature I meant. So Jesse Robson from Farm Credit Canada.
Yes, hello, thank you, Beverly. And I'm coming to you from Treaty 4 territory, the headquarters of FCC in Regina, Saskatchewan. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the type of knowledge that FCC offers. So we are a financial institution. We provide lending and knowledge services to the agriculture industry. And more recently, we've done a really concentrated effort on focusing on growing Indigenous agriculture, trying to find the gaps in Indigenous agriculture and doing our best to fill those gaps with our own expertise. And so right now, I just want to highlight the knowledge section of the FCC website. So if you go to fcc.ca/knowledge, you'll find what you'll see at the top of the slide here. That's kind of what you'll see on the knowledge section. And those first 5 sections from money and finance, strategy and planning, transition, economics, and managing people. If you click on those, it'll take you to what we call business essentials of those topics. And that's where we advise people start when you're at the early stages of creating an agriculture or food business. We have these things like 10 steps to a solid business plan. Jennifer with CEF had kind of mentioned that as well, doing the research and seeing what it is you need to do in order to begin a successful farming or food operation. And so a lot of that research you'll find right there on FCC Knowledge, fcc.ca/knowledge. And so I encourage you to go there, check it out. At FCC, we do finance into Indigenous agriculture. We have we're able to lend on reserve or off reserve, depending on, everything is done with our lending on a case-by-case basis. So we are looking into the best ways for an individual. So we know there are a lot of different scenarios. There might be someone who's on reserve, individual looking to start a ranching operation, or it might be a First Nations Economic Development Corporation looking to start, or it could be on and off reserve, combination of those, or any number of combinations. So that's why everything that we're doing when it comes to lending into Indigenous agriculture, we're doing it on a case-by-case basis, and then growing our own knowledge on how to best serve those customers. Sorry, was there a question there?
I was just going to say geography isn't something to be concerned with here, whether it's on or off reserve.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And I mentioned that because we've had questions in the past about, are you able to finance on reserve? And so I think that's important to highlight for sure. And then I do have below that just a list of a couple Aboriginal financial institutions. You can see CEF is on there as well. And I think that's an important part of the industry for sure. And we don't want to look at like any of those institutions or any other number of financial institutions are our competition. We just want the Indigenous agriculture industry to grow. And so the best way to do that, I think, is to be able to have all channels available to customers and prospects so that they can find the right path to success. And on that note, we've done a lot of our own research on asking those who are in the Indigenous agriculture industry and finding out where it is that there are gaps, where it is that we need to be better. And so what we do with that information is we're sharing that with others in the industry, other agriculture institutions, and looking at how it is that we can improve the service sector of the agriculture industry. And so we are in the early stages of creating somewhat of a network for people looking to get involved in agriculture, where there will be knowledge, there will be information on financing, information on funding, information on peer groups and things like that. That's in the early stages right now, but yeah, it is something
really
growing.
Really strengthening the connections on that, because there's so many opportunities in the agriculture, agri-foods, aquaculture fields that one person can't be the expert in everything, but having those connections is really important. So you guys have a lot of knowledge within your organization, but working with the Indigenous institutions like Saskatchewan Indian Equity Foundation helps to strengthen those ties.
Yes, definitely. The industry is built on strong partnerships, and that at all levels, top to bottom of the industry for sure.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Jesse. This is now where we get into the part that some of you guys have been anxiously awaiting, and that's the draw itself. So Aaron, as I mentioned, is your key person here. He's going to be bringing this up. Just going to do a quick little introduction for what's happening in the next 3 weeks itself. So our next sessions is next week. It's on production, marketing, and packaging. This is your Atlantic Canada panel with Ulnuwig Aboriginal Business Services. They're one of the Aboriginal capital corporations that Jesse alluded to in his comments itself. So we've got Paul Langdon from Ulnuwig, Mike Randall with Lennox Island First Nation Developments. They're doing large scale production and really tackling the issue of food security. And we've got Jolene Lasky. She's with Wollastoke Maple Syrup. Absolutely delicious product. And yes, that is actually being tapped in trees off from Atlantic Canada. So she does whiskey branding itself. At the end of the month, we've got talks on greenhousing. Dale Worm, he's Indigenous person, formerly with Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada until he retired. Now he's been working on the National Indigenous Agricultural Association, extremely knowledgeable on a lot of different things. Stephanie Cook with Opaskwayak Waisek Cree Nation. They've got the vertical aquaponics, gardens and greenhousing. That was driven by health needs as well as food security. And I mentioned Jacob Beaton already with Tea Creek, and they're doing youth training, community programs, biofuels. So in many ways, the permaculture, the linking bit. And then our last session, beginning of December, is with Makavik Corporation. Marianne Mason, Jordan Stafford. Jordan's going to be speaking on the Pirasuvik project in the food center. She's with the health services in Nunavut itself. So I'm going to be talking about that. And we've got Dawn Tabodongang. She's with First Nations growers. So she's in seed preservation and cultural foods. EJ Fontaine with Amic and Cedar Lake Ranch. And he's going to talk about restoring cultures. And he also has a cattle ranch and does labor training and matching itself. So hoping you can join us again on the 3 next Tuesdays. Thank you for joining us today. Of course, our key topics today had to do with food security, succession planning, cultural values and principles, and growing a business that meets either local needs, home needs, food security, or entering into larger markets. Everyone have a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and be kind. We hope to see you next week. Thank you for joining us.